Okay, so we'll get started this morning, and if some other folks join us, that's fine. They can roll in. So,
Shiva.
oh, okay. All right, is everyone able to see my screen? Can I just get a thumbs up that you're able to see? Okay, thank you. So good morning, everyone. I really appreciate you making it here to join me virtually so early this morning. We're going to go over a master's program, the ST series, which is the art of storytelling. My name is Michelle, and I will, facilitate this workshop for you. So if at any time you have a question, a comment, concern, anything, please feel free to virtually raise your hand through Zoom so that I get prompted and I can see that, or just turn on your microphone and please interrupt me because we have a lot of folks in the workshop, so I might miss your hands up, but there is a lot of information that we have to cover in a short amount of time, which means that, I might be speaking quite a lot and there might be something that you miss, but we're here to learn more and dig into these programs. So it is, in all our best interest to ask some questions. So please feel free to stop me, okay? So first of all, let's look at the landscape of the different modules that you might teach as a master's ST teacher. So there are some 100 level classes that are right here. We have Storyscapes 101 and From Story to Screen 102. So those are the 100 levels classes. That indicates maybe a newer master's student or student still taking like the first tier of master's classes. We then have several 200 level: career portfolio, drama and performance, data literacy, and journalism. And just out of curiosity, it's possible that some instructors here might have taught one or some of these modules. Is that the case for any of y'all? Have you taught some of these or any of these? I'm seeing X's, I'm seeing head shaking yes. Okay. All right, well, the good news is that there is a theme of storytelling throughout all of these. So if you do have experience with one of them, it's very transferable to the next. And if you don't have any experience, once you learn about the module and get your feet wet in your first class, again, you'll be able to transfer the experience to the others, which is quite cool. Okay, so let's first talk about the overall ST module checkpoints. These are the checkpoints laid out by Chungdam, and these checkpoints are used by your faculty managers or head instructors and team managers in order to see, are you on track for the way that this course is designed in the classroom? And so I think it's valuable to go over the checkpoints just to know, where you need to be at in your classes. And that's what your managers will be observing for as well. So the first checkpoint here asks if the instructor is able to establish and then confirm student understanding of the lesson content. Okay, well, I kind of love this one. It's very straightforward. Do you introduce and establish the content, and then do you confirm that students understand it? I think as educators, we probably can all be really successful in achieving this checkpoint. And it's a bit, broad in general, right? Okay. The next checkpoint gets a little more specific. It asks if the instructor urges students to then take what they've learned, their acquired skills, and apply them on the explore and project pages. So we'll go over in the segment guides what those pages actually mean, but that's something to keep in mind while you are prepping. And while you're in your smart textbooks looking at your lessons, is on the explore page and the project page, in what ways are you taking the skill theory or the target lesson content for the day and integrating it into the explore and project activities, because that's something, as I said, that managers will be checking for. So any questions on the module checkpoints? Okay, thanks. So let's dive into 101 in a bit more detail. The segment guide goes over the objectives. And for me, I always like to prep these objectives for my class prep because it helps keep me on track and to know, what am I really trying to achieve? And I guess just some keywords to draw your attention to. First of all, we want to focus on a variety of storytelling mediums. So we're not just emphasizing literature, we want to emphasize podcasts, short stories, poems, really anything that you want to get into with the students and that the students enjoy in terms of stories is applicable to this class. Okay, the other thing is the process of analysis. How do we analyze different mediums? Okay, the next, I guess, keyword or phrase would be creation, right? Giving students the opportunity to then output and make their own stories. And then the last checkpoint, the last objective, just looking at how we communicate our ideas, right? So what literary skills are we using? How have we learned about metaphor or similes, analogies, and then applied it in our own work? Any questions on these objectives? Okay, great. So there are 3 novels, 3 books that will be used through 101. We have The Science of Storytelling. Okay, and this first one is kind of looking into the parts of a story, like plots, meanings, setting, exposition, etc. The Hunger Games is then one of the first fiction stories. This is a really fun one. Students love The Hunger Game. I loved reading The Hunger Game when I was in school. And then we have finally Make Noise. So these are the 3 pieces of text that you will use in the class. And then it shows, what lesson content and projects are applicable for each book. Okay, so before I was mentioning that the checkpoint said, are you able to apply the skills on the Explore and the project pages? So that just means when you're looking at your SEG guide, check out Explore and check out Project, which pretty much means from the hour-and-a-half point, or let's say like the second part of your 3-hour class, in that second half of the class, are you able to integrate the skills that are happening when you're in these like scout or dive components, right? When you're going over the different topical skills, are you then making sure that this information is going to be reflected down here in the project and explore? Does that make sense? So just keep that in mind for the module checkpoint. Okay. Okay, then let's talk about some of the different types of output. So there's creative writing that happens in the class where students draft their own stories. There is also a world building project where students focus on like more visual representation and building the backstory of a world. We then also have several podcasting projects, which my students have really enjoyed, where they plan out their podcast, make a script, then create their presentation, record it, and then use like multimedia to produce the podcast and edit it and present it in the final week. And so this is actually the final project that is recommended for this module is the podcast project. So there is a lot of homework in our master's modules. We have essay and story writing that happens in the first month of the class. And then we also have podcast homework that starts essentially from week 7 in order to get the students prepared for the final project. And the podcast homework, the podcasts are prepped already for you. So you just go through this list of podcasts. There are links already pulled for you and then provide those to the students. And then they have a handout that accompanies the podcast. So while they're listening to the podcast, they have to complete the podcast case study where they put the name, the episode, and then information on what they heard from this week's podcast. Okay, so that's the homework for Storyscapes. And just before I jump to the next one, I wanted to also show you some examples of some project output from a class like this. So let me just switch gears here. Okay. So in a storytelling class, I kind of took creative liberties, which we're welcome to do as master's instructors, and decided that we would make like a class publication. And we would take all of the storytelling and work that we did during the semester and turn it into a book. So I put the class syllabus as the first page. and made author profiles of my different students. And then the students had to create novel summaries of each text that we read in the class, and then make like new covers for the books, and then also make short stories and different creative prompts based off of what we read. So here they did an activity writing about the trolley, and this was a short story. We also had a chapter from a book because they had to try and write different chapter excerpts from their own books. We also did some poetry, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, we did like some blackout poetry where I took like a photocopy of an important page from Lord of the Flies, and then the students black out or emphasize, the words that they want in order to make a poem. So I just did a bunch of different, creative projects each week. And then at the end of the class, I put this all together in Canva as an actual book and then printed it for the students, which was really fun. I think they felt really accomplished to have like a physical text at the end of the semester. And it also helped to make sure that we produced really high quality work because they felt, motivated that it was going into this final document. So that's just an example of something you can do in a master's class is really feel free to personalize and take what's there in the textbook and, modify it how your students will appreciate it and how you see fit. Okay. And let's hop back. Okay. So 102, the next 100 level module is from story to screen. Okay. And here the objective is focusing in on films, which is really cool. And the students, I also think, really love this class because we're storytelling through media specifically. We're also teaching specific elements such as script writing or designing a set, and then looking at the implications of technology and how those things impact the stories we tell. So here, non-linear writing skills are the emphasis, and this is something that is likely very new to your students. So that's something to keep in mind when you're prepping, is that they are likely unfamiliar with these writing skills. And maybe as educators, we need to prepare on how to teach these writing skills too, because it might have been a while since we've used anything like this. Okay, so the books and films that accompany this course are Jurassic Park, The Martian, and The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which are all really fun stories. And we use these book excerpts and film scenes in order to teach different skills like screenwriting, storyboarding, skit performances, etc. So there's a large dramatic emphasis in this module. Okay, and I just included this again to just emphasize that you want to make sure when you're preparing these explore and project pages that again, you're taking the information and the applicable skills from Scout and Dive and transferring them down here in order to achieve the module checkpoint. Okay. So in storytelling, we have a term project. So instead of just a final project that we introduce at the end, we're going to work on this project all throughout. So here, the students need to choose a book that they want to write a script about. So it says that they need to select around 15 to 20 pages, a maximum of 30 pages that they would base their scripts off of. Okay, so as the instructor, I think it's important that you prepare a few ideas of what books or chapters would be appropriate for this kind of term project. So that means for your week 1 class, that would be something really important to already start thinking about because it's a term project. Get some examples of some books or chapters that the students could use. Okay. Then we introduce the project from week 1 and work on it all the way along until the end of the semester. Okay. So another important modification you could consider is to create your own templates for the script writing that you will give to the students, and the students write based off of your template. because there's a lot of moving parts that the module asks for in terms of things like scene headings, parentheticals, differentiating like the character, the dialogue, what shot number we're on, all of this. And the students, again, are likely hugely unfamiliar with this style of writing. Maybe as the instructor too, I was very unfamiliar with this style of writing. So I think creating a template and passing that out from the first class is a really great idea. It's also important that you plan this term project and plan on student absence. This is something that can happen, right? Our students don't come necessarily every single week. So if that's the case, how are we modifying this term project, right? What are the modifications that will be made? Okay, you can also consider pair or small group work for this module because a lot of things are designed individually, right? But week after week, if we're having the students work on their own, this can mean a lot of quiet time. This can also mean it could be a little bit dry in the classroom sometime. So depending on class size, do feel free to modify for like pair or small group work. Any questions on that? Okay, thanks. So there's a term project timeline included in your segment guide that you can check out for like the important tasks and their due dates. Do I have anyone in this call who has actually taught 102? I'm just curious. Any 102 teachers? Okay, I just wanted to know how the term project went for y'all, but that's okay. Let's keep going. We've moved on to the first 200 level module, which is career portfolio. Okay, so in this module, we are teaching students skills surrounding their own ambitions and goals for their career. Okay, so we're looking at how to market ourselves. Okay, we're looking to focus on goal setting in the classroom, how to speak positively about oneself. I really love this objective, and this is something that I emphasized a lot in my class is how do we sell ourselves? How do we say I'm the best? Because my students tend to be really hesitant to do that. So I think it's a great skill to focus on as you're prepping, speaking positively about yourself. And then how to take your school-based experience or job-based experience in order to transfer that to the real world. Okay. These are the overall objectives and kind of keywords jumping out at us. And then for 201, there is no text for this class. There's just our smart textbook lesson content and then assigned project output. So you don't have any book that goes along here. Okay, and here you'll actually notice that in this segment guide, we don't see anything that says explore, right? There's no explore page. We only have project materialization. Okay, so that means that, as I've been emphasizing, the skill lesson that comes in the first hour, again, we then need to find out how are we going to apply that down here in the project, okay? But there's no explore page for this module. Okay, and the final project is to create a student portfolio. So the students take their work from throughout the semester and put it together for a portfolio. And let me just show y'all an example of that from my class. Okay. So my student, this is her portfolio. This is Lucia. So she introduced herself at the start of the portfolio and then made several slides that went over her different goals, both academically and in her career. She made like a resume of her life and her life experiences. She sampled various different works that she was proud of and things that she's accomplished as a student that she thinks best represents her. She included videos of herself, showcasing her skills. So she's playing a piano at a concourse hall. She's figure skating. There was a video of her doing Ashtanga yoga, which is super cool. She's like a yogi already, which was really fun. And then there are projects both at school that she's done and then projects from the classroom as well. We can't see it here, but this is one of the videos we made in class that she linked in. She went over different awards that she's won. and then testimonials from her different teachers and from her friends that can vouch for her and speak to her skills. She included her MBTI. And then she had peer reflections as well. So I asked my students to interview each other and reflect on each other's skills and then include that in the presentation. So this is like an example of what the final project output could look like. I had the students make the PPT and then give a 10-minute presentation on themselves at the end of the term. Okay. Then I'll hop back to my other. Okay. So let's move on to drama and performance. Okay, so this is 202, another 200 level class. So the objective here to focus on is to understand major figures in the world of drama and performance. In this case, the figures we've selected for the class are Shakespeare, Ibsen, and Wilde. Okay, so we want to have students understand examples of European theater productions, okay, and the different genres and styles that go along with it. One of the, I guess, most key objectives, in my opinion, are developing their performance skills. And so I think it's important to really emphasize this one, how to develop their performance skills, things like improving, things like confidence, memorization, different skills that you use when you perform. Okay, and then finally, to gain an understanding of storytelling through the medium of performance. Right, so we're really emphasizing, like in the title, performance. Okay, then I think that while these objectives can be really straightforward, sometimes it's harder to understand how to teach to the objectives. So do I have anyone who has taught this module, for example? Any instructors who've done 202?
Yeah, I have.
Okay, so Maddie, can I ask you, what has been your experience teaching to these objectives?
First of all, I love this class. This has to be like one of my favorite master's classes I've taught so far. The first like two objectives are really easy to meet just in the first 2 hours of class or so. Like the book is very straightforward about which dramatic devices to teach, for example, and which aspects of the book, the place to look for. The third one was also very easy to meet. Like I would dedicate the first 45 minutes to an hour of class to different improv games or activities, for example. I had them perform poetry in one class. The last one, I actually gave myself a little bit of leeway on, where I didn't stick only to stage production and performance necessarily for my projects, but I also covered things like short films, which is what I decided my final project for this class should be.
Great. Okay, so I think, thanks, Maddie, so much for sharing. I think what's really valuable there is to show that how we interpret these objectives is going to be different for each instructor. So this last objective, Maddie chose to apply that through the medium of film. And then that matched with the theme of the final project, which again was some personalization that she's done. So as master's levels instructors, I think that's going to be one of the skills we need to hone, is taking these objectives and understanding realistically, how are we going to pull this off in the classroom? And I think that that takes some advanced planning. So for me, from my experience, when I teach masters, I don't do it the same way that I do with like C1 or C2, maybe A2. I don't prep week by week. I try and prep several weeks at a time. And I always actually open up the final lesson first. So before I prep week 1, I actually open up 12 and 13 just to look at what's happening at the end, right? So then I can plan for that the entire way through. And that can help me also better achieve the objectives. Okay. So we have 3 different pieces that the students will read. We have Hamlet, Ibsen's A Doll's House, And then Wild's The Importance of Being Earnest and Other Plays. Okay, so these are the different performances that the students focus on for this module. Okay, so here in this class structure, the explore and project components are here. They're very clear. So again, just always make sure that in the scout and dive section, you're applying the skills later on. And here are some pieces that I've pulled from the SEG that I think are really important to go over. The first of which is a warm up and theater game. So I think Maddie mentioned that she spends about 45 minutes in her class running these kinds of games and essentially like dramatic workshops. And I think that this is really essential because this is where we get our students out of their shell. This is also, I think, where we start to differentiate reading. I'm sorry, give me 1 second, Kitty. Sorry about that. I have a hungry cat. Okay, so warm up and theater games. This is where we start to really differentiate reading a novel versus reading a play. And what is the difference between these two things? So I think that theater games really help, as I said, to get students excited about the material and then also to differentiate what they're reading. Yes, Maddie, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I just wanted to pitch in that one of the things that made my class successful was telling the kids that I don't want to treat this just like a straightforward literature class. They shouldn't read plays the same way that they read any other book. So things like having annotation bookmarks help me out, where kids could actually write down their own reaction or like what they imagine this would look like on a stage as they're reading through the play. And I would get them to sometimes do readers theater's activity by pretending to be one of the characters in the play and actually get up and act it out, as opposed to simply reading it and then doing analysis, which is it's fun, but it's not appropriate for a drama and performance class.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for adding that point in, Maddie. I think that definitely helps you achieve the objective of the course overall too. And I think that's part and parcel of the next tip, which is to try and build a performance space in your classroom. This was something I was really excited about when I saw it in the segment guide to teach this class. In order to better create the mindset of performance, rather than have students just sit in their desks like we do in every class, you can actually start to create a dedicated performance space where students are up out of their seats, reading out loud from the text, or doing these warm up and theater games. And so by delineating the performance space, I think this also adds to the impact and the effect of showing that this is not just regular literature, this is something different, right? So that's something to keep in mind for this module too. All right, so we have a final project that happens in this class. Here they are asked to come up with a 1-act play and write their own script. So in master's classes, again, you are able to modify final projects. And I think an essential part of the modification, like I said, is just planning ahead. So if you know that you're not going to be running like a 1-act play and script writing, that instead you want to actually do like recorded scenes with stage design and costuming, if you want to do something different, I think just plan for that. That way you're teaching the skills that build towards that final output. Does that make sense? Okay, so the segment guide just goes over the schedule of how to run the project. They start in week 11, coming up with ideas. In week 12, we're finalizing, and going over everything that's in the project output. And then in week 13, they would actually do their final presentations. Okay. One thing to note is that just like with any presentation-based module, we always want to have a Q&A session and feedback session that happens after the presentation. All right, then let's talk about 203. Okay, so this module is called data literacy. All right, so if we check out these objectives, okay, here the first objective is looking how to understand the way that information presents itself in order to identify the ways it can be misinterpreted or the ways that we don't, take an objective look at that data. Okay, then, how human behavior is going to impact that interpretation of data. And then finally, critical and creative analysis skills, right? How can we take a creative and critical look at a set of data and interpret it in this way? Okay. And then let me just clear these. So we use the book Factfulness in this class, and Factfulness essentially just has a bunch of different scenarios in which we think a set of data or we have an idea designed around one thing, but actually maybe the inverse is true when we take a more objective look at things. So there's different content, misunderstanding numbers, right? Developing versus developed countries, taking a look at some maybe common like tropes around data and then how to break them down. All right. Okay, so again, use the Scout skills for your and Dive skills for Explore and for Project. Okay, so something to note, an important note, is that I think this is quite a challenging course for students. And I'm curious, has anyone taught data literacy that's in our call? Okay, no one with data literacy experience. All right. So I will say, I think that Factfulness as the companion piece to the class is quite an interesting read. And for some master students, it is level appropriate. For others, the text itself is quite advanced because it's a lot of academic writing that presents several scenarios. And then by breaking down the scenarios comes to like the thesis at the end. So it's not a style that students, that all students would be familiar with per se. The other thing is that a lot of the terminology and the technical concepts are based around, kind of data and mathematics. And so it is best suited towards higher level master students. Although it is a 200 course, I think that at my school, we've had some students who also take 300 level courses complete this one because it is advanced. This also means that as instructors, it's really important that we are well prepared and that we are able to provide, insightful and engaging commentary and insight into the concepts. And so I'll be super honest about this. Like in my undergrad, I was a liberal arts student. During my master's, I studied education. At no point in the past, honestly, 15 years, have I been, interested or geared towards interpreting data sets and providing critical and creative analysis. So for me, this is a hugely challenging course, not only for how I'm going to get my students to understand it, but also how am I going to understand what's happening here? And that this means sometimes we have to adjust the level of prep. And I think it also means we have to rely on our colleagues or managers or other resources that we have at our schools in order to run a successful class. So even just now in the presentation, chatting with Maddie about the data and performance class, or if anyone at your school has taught this ST 203, lean on them, ask them questions, run your prep by them. And that's something that I do as well. Because I'm not necessarily the best data literacy instructor, but I strive to be. Okay, I have a question in the chat from Maddie, so let me pause here. How does ST203 differ from the WD series, or is there an overlap in lesson style? Okay, so one of the main differences I would say is that this falls under the storytelling and storyscapes module because of what's going to happen in the project output. So let me pop back. Okay, so in the project output, there are some of them that feel like a WD class, like a world discourse class, like a research project or a news report. These ones are, I would say, more so in the WD vein. Okay, but then for the presentations and persuasive speeches and final project, these ones take a more creative approach. So instead of just being centered around, like in WD, if nuclear power was the topic, we would just have that as like, okay, go over the benefits and the drawbacks of using nuclear power. And it would be strictly like an academic, I guess, project output. In this ST series, we have more room for creative interpretation. So for their final project, for example, they would be acting out that they're in front of a boardroom and that they're creating advertisements about how they're going to like pitch their product that they've created, for example. So there are commonalities, but I think the difference is in the creative output. Thanks for your question. All right. Then let me move on. My time here. Okay, let's move to journalism, ST 204. Okay, so for this module, journalism, some of the things to draw your attention to are looking at different issues. I would say, oops, sorry about that, both globally and in my class, I also tried to contextualize things a bit more through a lens of Korea. Because I found that it was more interesting for my students. We would look at a global issue, but then we would find a more local application or local context for that issue, just to engage my students further on it. Okay, the other objective here is to look at our ability to think logically and critically on an issue. Okay, and then communicate our ideas in a persuasive manner. Right, and then again, understanding fundamental and global issues, okay? And again, I like to contextualize those things locally in the Korean context for my students. All right, so for journalism, there is no book or novel that accompanies this class. We just have the SMART textbook with our different topics and then project outputs. Each class has a distinct skill theory. So I can say for this class, achieving the checkpoint is really simple. And I love that because your skill theory is right here in the guide for you. If tone is the skill that we're going over, make sure there's an emphasis on tone in the project. Okay, so that's really nice and straightforward. Okay, so for lessons 1 to 12, this is a breakdown of the activities that we'll do. Something to note here for Article A and Article B, this is an analysis activity where we actually look at some news articles and analyze them. And Article A and B should have opposing points of view on a similar topic. So if the topic is animal testing in laboratories, you would have maybe one opinion piece or editorial that supports it and one that opposes it. In the lesson textbook, these articles are already provided for you, but several times throughout this course, I have selected my own articles as well. Another tip that I can give for this is to actually print out the articles. That way you can run an annotation activity really effectively. Instead of just reading on the tablets, the students have the actual news or journal article in front of them and they can annotate on the article. Okay. And then I want to show some output from this class as well. So let me pull that open. Okay, so for one of the lessons, the topic was universal basic income. And so after teaching this content, I asked my students to create their own news article about UBI and apply it to the Korean context. Because the way the lesson was designed is that they were looking at like UBI in Switzerland, UBI in Canada, and yeah, looking at the way Denmark or other countries have used this scheme. But I thought that it would be more interesting potentially and relevant to the students to consider the Korean atmosphere, the Korean economic climate, and C, how would UBI interact, here in Korea? So the students had to write their own news article about that concept. So I told them, like, we had to teach things like their headline, their byline, putting the date, including images with captions underneath, including subheadings throughout the article. I also showed them how to use specific quotes and quote, like, for example, the welfare minister, Lisa McLeod, said, and then I taught students about like inserting quotes into articles and how to do that. Okay, and so this is an example of an article that a student wrote for the class. Okay. However, one thing I can note is that the lesson textbook has this designed as a 1-week project. So I believe we did this project in week 4. That's when I introduced it. And ideally, the textbook and the segment guide is asking that we accomplish this in 1 hour, in the 1-hour project output. Now, the way things were in my master's class is that my students were not at that level to be able to produce this kind of output, this high quality output in 1 hour. It just wasn't going to happen. So that's fine. What do? We modify. So for my next week's project, I took time from next week's project, week 5, and then spanned this project over 2 weeks instead. Because what I did was I looked at weeks 4, 5, and 6, what were the topics and what were the various projects. And I just took the skills from all of that and incorporated it into one bigger project where we have like a more meaningful outcome, that students have assigned homework that they're working on. They bring in a draft of the article, we edit it together, and then in the end, they submit something that looks really polished and professional and definitely master's level. So if your students are not able to do that on the first go in the 1 hour that's allotted, do feel free to make modifications. Okay. So let me. Okay. So here are some things I think as a master's instructor I've learned throughout the years, and on the theme of project modifications, here's some things to consider. The first thing I would recommend or suggest is creating a Google Drive for your class and running your class, prepping your class through the Google Drive. That means that in the first week, you can assign for homework for all students to create a Gmail. So they all have their own Gmail account. And then all of the work that you prep is there in the drive for the students. And then that way, all their homework, any kind of questions, any homework postings, projects, everything is shared among all students and it's all accessible in one place for them. And there's no mix up. The other cool thing about it is that there is a Google Chat feature. And that's something that my students have started using with me, is chatting questions or comments in the group Google Chat. So if they're like, oh, teacher, where's this vocab list? Or what are we supposed to do for part 3 of the homework? They can actually actively communicate with me, not just when they're in class or at the academy. They can do so through the Google Chat room. Okay. Next thing to consider is to lesson prep based on your individual student needs. So I will say, in my experience, in master's is where I have the most diverse fluency and cognitive ability among students. So if I have 6 learners in the classroom, their fluency and their cognitive ability is going to be on a huge sliding scale compared to my other modules. That's my experience. Maybe for anyone who has taught masters before, can I ask you, what's been your experience? Do you have a diverse range of student ability in your master's classrooms? Okay, maybe not, maybe yes. That's all right. For me, that's been the case. Okay, so based on your student needs, do feel free to modify the program. Okay, if you're teaching 203 data literacy and the skills are, oh, maybe I have a chat. Chat. Yes, for sure. Okay. Oh, Ashanti says all kids have lived abroad and attended international school. Very interesting. At our school, many of the kids have never left Korea. Okay, have never been to international school. Some of them have, many have not. So yes, prep to their needs, prep your class, see what lands, see what sticks, see what doesn't, and feel free to modify as you move through. Another thing I like to note is taking a realistic approach to homework completion. What I mean by realistic is that there is a lot of homework that happens in master's classes, and a lot of that homework is essential in order to move on to the next piece of the lesson. That being said, we know that our students are quite busy. They usually attend multiple Hagwons. They usually have a lot going on at their middle schools or elementary schools as well. High schools sometimes, right? So if that's the case, be realistic, right? Feel free to scale down or scale up as is appropriate for your learners. For your projects, I think it can be a good idea to prepare handouts and to try and incorporate more group work. At our school, myself and another instructor, Nicole, we've been prepping and designing the journalism class together this semester. And so what we've done is modify several of the activities to include group work, because the journalism module, the way that that's structured in the textbook, is individual work every week, all 13 weeks. But that can be a little bit dry and boring for the students. They enjoy peer-to-peer collaboration, and that's an important skill as well. So we've just made appropriate modifications. Okay, and finally, keep in mind that you always want to be building and working towards final projects and term projects as you're teaching. Okay, and one more thing I wanted to show is just a handout that has been made for this class, just so you can have an idea of what that would look like if you were going to make your own handouts. So maybe I'll just show the one for that journalism class that we're teaching. So right here, for their final project, we made a handout on what they're doing for the project, which is creating a daily news show. And in the handout, we go over specifically what are the objectives, how will the final project be evaluated, what is the prompt for the project, right? What are the components that need to be included in the project, how to format the news show, the writing expectation for the class, what literary skills to include, because as I said, we always want the skill to apply to the project. So we've laid that out really clearly here. What are the skills? How are you going to include them in your project? What does the schedule look like? How are we going over, the schedule, and then maybe some useful websites that they can use for this project. And then this is something you can physically hand out. That way, not everything is just like on the tab. And then again, like for my class, this is just in the drive. So I can just show you here. In the drive. This is the drive we've created for our ST204. So we have Monday and Tuesday class. We have all the vocab lists. We have our prep. If I pop up on Tuesday, we have my class and Nicole's class. And then all the students have access to this drive. And we run the class through here. Okay, great. So I know I just threw, honestly, like a whack of information at everyone. We've just gone through a bunch of different modules in detail. So I would like to know if there are any questions or concerns. We actually have Ben from the ESL content team who has joined us on this call, and he's also here to provide any additional support or answer questions that y'all might have about teaching any of these ST master courses. So do we have any questions, concerns? Okay, then if not, what I'm going to do is send a link to a survey that I would like to ask that you fill out. Oh, Abraham, sorry. Is it possible to just run through the 100 courses one more time? Yeah. I'll do that really briefly. If you were late to the call, then you can watch back the recording as well. But 100 level, we have Storyscapes 101 and Story to Screen 102. These are the two 100 level. Storyscapes is essentially centered around different types of storytelling, creative writing, poetry, books, films, podcasts, etc. We teach it with 3 different texts: The Science of Storytelling, Hunger Games, and Making Noise. And we have a variety of different projects that we run, like creative writing, okay, like a world building project and podcasting projects. Their assigned homework is all available in the segment guide, so you can take a look at that. And then for Story to Screen 102, the objective is to focus on script writing and how films, movies, videos incorporate storytelling through visualization, description, shifts in perspective. We also take a look at different genres like dramas or action films, etc. The books and films are Jurassic Park, The Martian, and The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And we have a term project in this class that we work on from week 1, from the very first class all the way to the end. So if you are teaching 102, I think it's really important the prep work you put into that first lesson, because once that lesson's done, you really can't, go back and get that week 1 back. So have a good plan of action from week 1. I use this as an example of like a handout template that you can give to students when they have to do script writing. This is something I made for the students. Okay. Quick little run through, but as I said, you can always watch it back. Okay, and in the chat now, I'm linking a survey about this workshop. They will ask you questions in the survey overall about the workshop and also about myself, the facilitator. My name is there in the chat as well. I'm Michelle. And I'm also going to include my email address that you can keep to have as a contact. If you have any questions about the master's program moving forward, you can always feel free to reach out to me, and I'll do my best to field any questions that y'all would have. Okay. Yeah, so please click through to the link. Great. Ben's email is now in the chat too for some more general master's related questions. Okay, so I think we can take the last 5 minutes of the session just to fill out that survey. And then I think, I know y'all might have a busy schedule with these workshops. So that will be all from me, unless you have any other questions, comments, considerations. Yes, I'll take the last 5 minutes to go ahead and feed my crying cat. Thanks, Maddie.